The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. Have you ever wondered why some mornings seem to set the tone for your entire day, while others leave you feeling rushed, distracted, and already exhausted before the day has even begun? Think about it. You wake up, reach for your phone, check a few notifications, scroll through social media, maybe watch a couple of videos, and before you know it, your mind is already filled with other people's opinions, problems, and priorities. Then you rush through breakfast, get ready, and start your day feeling like you're already behind. But what if the first hour of your morning could be used differently? What if, instead of immediately reacting to the world around you, you spent that time intentionally working on yourself? This is one of the most important ideas behind the Miracle Morning. The concept isn't simply about waking up early or forcing yourself out of bed at some ridiculously early hour. It's about understanding that the way you begin your morning can influence the way you approach everything that comes afterward. Your morning is like the opening scene of a movie. It doesn't determine the entire story, but it can establish the mood, direction, and energy for everything that follows. If your first thoughts are stress, notifications, deadlines, and comparison, you may carry that mental state into your work, your relationships, and your decisions. But if you begin with a few minutes of calm, reflection, movement, learning, and goal setting, you create a completely different starting point. And there's something powerful about doing this before the demands of the day take over. For a short period of time, nobody is asking you for anything. Your phone isn't demanding your attention. Your responsibilities haven't started piling up yet. You have a small window where you can decide what deserves your attention before the world decides it for you. That's why the morning can become more than just a time when you wake up. It can become a personal development laboratory, a quiet space where you work on your mindset, your body, your goals, and ultimately the person you are becoming. And you don't need a perfect life to do this. You don't need 2 free hours every morning. You don't need an expensive routine or a complicated schedule. The real question is much simpler. When you wake up, are you immediately reacting to life, or are you intentionally preparing yourself to live it? That shift in perspective is where the Miracle Morning truly begins. Now, if you're wondering what you're actually supposed to do during this intentional morning, this is where the core of the Miracle Morning comes in. The idea is built around 6 simple practices known as the Life Save ERS, and at first, the name might sound a little complicated, but the concept is actually very simple. Each letter represents one activity designed to develop a different part of your life: silence, affirmations, visualization, exercise, reading, and scribing. Think of these 6 practices as 6 different tools. One helps you calm your mind, another helps you shape your thoughts, another gets your body moving, another teaches you something new, and another helps you understand yourself. The interesting part is that you're not relying on just one habit to become a better version of yourself. Instead, you're giving attention to multiple areas at the same time. The first is silence. This can mean meditation, breathing exercises, prayer, or simply sitting quietly without immediately reaching for your phone. The purpose is to create a little mental space before the noise of the day begins. Then come affirmations. This is about deliberately choosing the messages you repeat to yourself. Instead of allowing fear, doubt, or negative self-talk to run automatically in the background, you begin reminding yourself of what you want, what you believe, and what actions you are committed to taking. Next is visualization. Here you mentally picture the future you're working toward. But it's not just about imagining yourself standing on a podium or holding a dream job. You can also visualize yourself doing the difficult work, staying consistent, handling setbacks, and taking the next important step. Then there's exercise. You don't necessarily need an intense workout. The goal is simply to wake up your body and increase your physical energy. Even stretching, walking, or a short bodyweight routine can change how awake and active you feel. Reading comes next. Instead of beginning your day by consuming random content, you spend some time learning something that can improve your knowledge, skills, or perspective. And finally, there's scribing, which essentially means writing. You might journal about your thoughts, goals, lessons, gratitude, or ideas. Writing gives your thoughts somewhere to go instead of letting them constantly circle around in your head. What makes the Saviorus interesting is the combination. You're not trying to completely transform your life in one morning. You're simply creating a short period where your mind, body, and goals all receive attention. And once you understand what each practice is designed to do, the next question becomes much more important. Why start with silence? Have you ever noticed how quickly your mind becomes noisy after you wake up? Before your feet even touch the floor, there might already be messages waiting for you, notifications popping up, thoughts about work, school, money, responsibilities, or everything you need to accomplish that day. And without realizing it, you can go from being asleep to mentally overwhelmed in just a few minutes. That's why the first part of the Life Savioress is silence. At first, silence might sound almost too simple to make a real difference, but the point isn't simply to sit quietly. The point is to give your mind a chance to slow down before the outside world starts competing for your attention. You can use this time for meditation, deep breathing, prayer, mindfulness, or simply sitting somewhere quietly and paying attention to your thoughts. There's no requirement to make it complicated. Imagine waking up and spending 5 minutes doing absolutely nothing except breathing slowly and being present. No scrolling, no checking messages, no jumping immediately into yesterday's problems. For those few minutes, you're not reacting. You're choosing. And that distinction matters. Most of us spend a huge part of the day responding to whatever appears in front of us. A notification appears, we check it. Someone sends a message, we respond. An email arrives, we open it. A problem appears, we deal with it. Eventually, the entire day can feel like one long reaction. Silence gives you a small opportunity to break that pattern. It creates a space between waking up and reacting to everything around you. In that space, you can ask yourself simple questions. How am I feeling today? What actually matters? What kind of person do I want to be today? What deserves my attention? And you don't have to feel perfectly peaceful for this practice to work. Your mind may wander. You may think about yesterday. You may remember something you need to do. That's completely normal. The goal isn't to eliminate every thought. It's to become more aware of your thoughts instead of automatically following every one of them. Over time, those few quiet minutes can become a kind of mental reset button. And once your mind becomes quieter, you have a much better opportunity to decide what you want to put into it. That brings us to the next part of the miracle morning, affirmations. Have you ever caught yourself saying something negative about yourself so many times that eventually you started believing it? Maybe it's, I'm not disciplined enough. I'm terrible at speaking. I always procrastinate. I'm just not good at this. At first, these might sound like harmless thoughts, but when you repeat them again and again, they can slowly become part of the story you tell yourself about who you are. This is where affirmations come into the miracle morning. Now, affirmations are sometimes misunderstood. They aren't about standing in front of a mirror and repeating, I'm rich, successful, and perfect, while hoping your life magically changes. That's not the real point. The deeper idea is to become intentional about the messages you repeatedly give yourself. Think about your mind like a voice that is constantly commenting on your life. If you never choose what that voice says, your fears, past failures, and insecurities may end up doing the talking for you. Affirmations give you a chance to change that conversation. But there's an important difference between a useful affirmation and an empty, positive statement. If you have never exercised before and tell yourself, I absolutely love working out every morning, your mind may immediately reject it. Instead, you could say something like, I am becoming someone who takes care of my body, and today I will take one small step toward that goal. Notice the difference. It isn't pretending that you have already achieved everything. It's reminding yourself of the identity and actions you're trying to build. You can create affirmations around almost anything: confidence, discipline, health, relationships, career, learning, or personal goals. For example, instead of saying, I never procrastinate, you might say, when something is important, I start before I feel ready. That statement gives you something practical to act on, and this is where affirmations become much more powerful. They shouldn't simply make you feel good for a few minutes. They should remind you what you are committed to doing. You can even connect an affirmation with a specific action. If your goal is to become healthier, your affirmation might remind you that you are someone who chooses movement, nutritious food, and consistency, even when motivation is low. The words themselves aren't magic. What matters is the combination of repeated thoughts and repeated behavior. When you consistently remind yourself who you want to become and then take actions that support that identity, your self-image can gradually begin to change. And once you have a clearer picture of the person you want to become, there's another powerful question. Can you actually picture yourself living that life? That's where the next SAVRS practice comes in, visualization. Have you ever imagined achieving something so clearly that, for a moment, you could almost feel what it would be like to actually live that reality? Maybe you've pictured yourself walking into your dream workplace, finishing a difficult degree, becoming financially independent, speaking confidently in front of a crowd, or finally accomplishing something you've been working toward for years. That simple act of mentally creating a picture of your future is the idea behind visualization. In the Miracle Morning, visualization is used to make your goals more than just words written on a piece of paper. Instead of simply saying, "I want to become successful," you take a moment to imagine what that success actually looks and feels like. But there's a mistake people often make here. Visualization shouldn't only be about imagining the final reward. If your goal is to become fit, don't only picture yourself with the body you want. Picture yourself waking up when you don't feel motivated, putting on your workout clothes, completing the exercise, choosing better food, and staying consistent, even after missing a day. If your goal is to build a successful business, don't only imagine the money or recognition. Picture yourself learning new skills, making difficult decisions, dealing with rejection, solving problems, and continuing when things don't go according to plan. That's because the journey is where your future is actually created. Visualization can also help make an abstract goal feel more concrete. A goal like, "I want to improve my life," is vague. But when you imagine the specific habits, decisions, environments, and behaviors connected to that goal, it becomes much easier to understand what you actually need to do. And you don't need a perfect imagination to practice this. You can close your eyes for a few minutes and mentally walk through your day. Imagine yourself handling an important conversation calmly. Imagine yourself finishing the task you've been avoiding. Imagine yourself staying focused when your phone is trying to distract you. The more specific the picture becomes, the easier it can be to connect your goal with actual behavior. But there's another important point. Visualization isn't a substitute for action. You can imagine your dream life every morning, but if your behavior never changes, nothing meaningful will happen. Visualization is useful because it can help direct your attention toward the actions you need to take. Think of it like looking at a destination before starting a journey. The picture doesn't move you forward, but it can remind you where you're going. And once you've trained your mind to focus on the direction you want to take, it's time to involve another part of the equation, the body. That brings us to exercise. Have you ever noticed how different you feel after moving your body, even when you didn't feel like exercising in the first place? Maybe you wake up feeling tired, heavy, and completely unmotivated. Then you go for a short walk, stretch for a few minutes, or do a quick workout. Suddenly you feel more awake. Your body feels active, your mind feels clearer, and starting the day doesn't seem quite as difficult. That's why exercise is another important part of the Miracle Morning. The idea isn't that you need to become a fitness expert or spend an hour in the gym before sunrise. Exercise is included because your physical state can influence the way you approach the rest of your day. Think about what happens when you spend the entire morning sitting still. You wake up, look at your phone, sit down for breakfast, sit in a car or at a desk, and before you know it, several hours have passed without much movement. Now compare that with starting your day by getting your body moving. It could be something as simple as stretching, walking around your neighborhood, doing push-ups, squats, yoga, jumping jacks, or following a short workout. The goal is not necessarily to exhaust yourself, the goal is to activate yourself. And there's another benefit that has nothing to do with physical appearance, morning exercise can become a small daily promise to yourself. You wake up, and instead of waiting for motivation to magically appear, you take action. Even on a day when you don't feel particularly energetic, you still move. That experience can reinforce a powerful message. I can do things even when I don't feel like doing them. That lesson can carry into other areas of life. You may be more willing to start a difficult project, study for an exam, make an important phone call, or work toward a long-term goal because you've already practiced taking action before motivation arrives. But this is also where balance matters. The miracle morning shouldn't turn into another source of pressure. If you only have 10 minutes, use 10 minutes. If you have an injury or physical limitation, choose an appropriate form of movement. And if you're consistently exhausted because you aren't sleeping enough, simply waking up earlier isn't the solution. The purpose is to energize your day, not punish yourself. Exercise is ultimately about creating momentum. You move your body, your energy changes, and that physical movement can make it easier to move mentally as well. And once your body is awake, there's one more thing you can do to prepare your mind for the day. Feed it something useful. That's where reading comes in. Have you ever noticed how easily the first thing you consume in the morning can influence your thoughts for the rest of the day? Imagine waking up and immediately opening social media. Within minutes, you're looking at someone else's vacation, someone else's success, someone else's opinions, and a dozen different pieces of information you never asked for. Your brain becomes busy before you've even decided what you want to think about. Now imagine doing something completely different. Instead of consuming random content, you spend even 10 or 15 minutes reading something that can actually make you smarter, calmer, or better at what you're trying to achieve. That's the purpose of reading in the miracle morning. The idea is simple. Before the world fills your mind with information, give yourself an opportunity to put something valuable into it. This could be a personal development book, a biography, a business book, a psychology book, a technical subject, or anything connected to a skill you genuinely want to develop. And you don't have to read 50 pages every morning. Even a few pages can matter when you do it consistently. Think about it this way. Reading one useful book for 15 minutes might not feel life-changing today, but repeat that habit for months, and you could eventually finish several books that teach you ideas you never would have encountered otherwise. More importantly, reading can change the questions you ask. You might discover a better way to manage your time. You might learn how successful people approach failure. You might understand your own habits more clearly. Or you might simply encounter an idea that completely changes the way you look at a problem. But there's one mistake to avoid: reading without applying. You can read hundreds of books and still remain exactly the same if every idea stays on the page. The real value comes when you take something you learned and connect it to your own life. Maybe you read about procrastination and realize you've been making tasks harder than they need to be. Maybe you learn about communication and decide to handle an upcoming conversation differently. Maybe you discover a new approach to your career and actually test it. That's when reading becomes more than information. It becomes transformation. And you also don't need to force yourself to read books you hate simply because they're considered productive. Choose material that genuinely helps you grow or understand something better. Your morning is valuable, and what you repeatedly put into your mind matters. But after you've learned something, there's another powerful step: slowing down and processing what you're thinking. Instead of letting all those ideas disappear into the rest of your day, you can put them on paper. And that brings us to the final SAVRS practice: scribing. Have you ever had a thought that seemed incredibly important in your head, but the moment you tried to explain it, you realized you couldn't quite put it into words? That happens because our minds are constantly moving. One thought leads to another, then another, until a simple concern can become a confusing mess of ideas, worries, plans, and possibilities. This is where scribing, or journaling, becomes useful. In the miracle morning, scribing simply means putting your thoughts onto paper. And no, you don't have to be a professional writer, and you certainly don't need to write several pages of deep philosophical thoughts every morning. You can start with a notebook and a few simple sentences. You might write about what you're grateful for, what you want to accomplish today, what you learned yesterday, what is bothering you, or what you want to improve. The reason this can be powerful is that writing forces you to slow down. A thought floating around in your head can feel huge and complicated, but once you write it down, you can actually look at it. Sometimes you discover that the problem isn't as big as it felt. Other times, you finally see what needs to be done. Journaling can also help you notice patterns. Imagine writing down your thoughts every morning for a month. You might start noticing that you repeatedly complain about the same problem. Maybe you keep postponing the same goal. Maybe certain situations consistently make you anxious or distracted. Once those patterns become visible, they become easier to address. Scribing can also be a place to record progress. Most people focus heavily on what they still haven't achieved. They forget how far they've already come. Writing down small wins gives you evidence that your effort is producing results, even when the bigger goal still feels far away. You can also use your journal as a personal conversation with yourself. Ask questions like, what is the most important thing I need to do today? What am I avoiding? What would make today meaningful? What did I learn from yesterday? What kind of person am I trying to become? You don't need perfect answers. Sometimes the value is simply in asking the question. And there's another interesting benefit. Once your thoughts are written down, you don't have to keep carrying all of them in your head. Your notebook becomes a place where ideas, worries, plans, and lessons can live outside your mind. That can create a sense of clarity before the day begins. So, silence helps you create mental space. Affirmations help shape your inner dialogue. Visualization gives your goals a clearer picture. Exercise activates your body. Reading feeds your mind with useful ideas. And scribing helps you process it all. Together, these 6 practices create something bigger than a morning checklist, a deliberate system for starting the day with intention. But knowing the 6 practices is one thing. Turning them into a habit is where the real challenge begins. Have you ever started a new routine with incredible motivation, followed it perfectly for a few days, and then suddenly found yourself back in the same old habits? Maybe you promised yourself you'd wake up early, exercise, read every day, journal, and finally become more productive. For the first few mornings, everything feels exciting. Then life gets busy. You sleep a little later. You skip one day, then another, and eventually the routine disappears. This is why the miracle morning isn't just about knowing the 6 SAVRS practices. The bigger challenge is turning those practices into something you can repeat consistently. One useful way to do that is through habit stacking and routine. Instead of treating every habit as a separate decision, you connect them together in a predictable sequence. For example, you might wake up, drink some water, sit quietly for a few minutes, repeat your affirmations, visualize your goals, exercise, read, and then journal. Over time, your brain begins to recognize the sequence. You don't have to wake up and ask yourself, should I meditate today? Should I read? Should I exercise? The routine already tells you what comes next. That matters because decision-making uses mental energy. The more choices you have to make first thing in the morning, the easier it becomes to negotiate with yourself. And you know that voice. Maybe I'll exercise later. I'll read tonight. I'm too tired today. Just 5 more minutes. A predetermined routine makes those negotiations less necessary. But consistency doesn't mean perfection. This is one of the most important things to understand if you want a routine to last. You will miss mornings, you will oversleep, you'll travel, you'll get sick. Some days will simply go badly. The mistake is thinking that missing one morning means you've failed. It doesn't. The real danger is turning one missed day into a missed week, and then eventually deciding that the entire routine wasn't for you. Instead, treat a missed day as an interruption, not an identity. You can simply return the next morning. It also helps to make the routine easy enough that you can actually maintain it. You don't need to spend 2 hours completing every practice. Start with a version that fits your real life. Maybe you begin with 10 or 15 minutes. Once the routine becomes automatic, you can expand it if you want. The goal is to create a system that survives ordinary life, not a perfect routine that only works when everything goes according to plan. Because ultimately, your results won't come from one amazing morning. They come from ordinary mornings repeated over and over. And if you're thinking, but I barely have any time in the morning, there's actually a version of the miracle morning designed around exactly that problem. Have you ever looked at a morning routine online and thought, that sounds great, but I don't have an extra hour every morning? Maybe you have work. Maybe you have classes, family responsibilities, a long commute, or simply a habit of pressing snooze more times than you'd like to admit. And if your morning is already packed, adding 6 new habits can sound less like self-improvement and more like another responsibility. That's where the 6-minute version of the miracle morning becomes interesting. The idea is simple. Instead of spending a long time on every SAVRS practice, you give each one roughly a minute. 1 minute of silence, 1 minute of affirmations, 1 minute of visualization, 1 minute of exercise, 1 minute of reading, and 1 minute of scribing. That's it. Now, obviously, you're not going to become an expert meditator in 60 seconds or finish an entire book in 1 minute. That isn't the point. The purpose is to remove the biggest excuse people often have when starting a new habit. I don't have enough time. Think about how different that feels. If someone tells you to spend an hour every morning improving yourself, your brain might immediately start looking for reasons why it won't work. But 6 minutes, that feels manageable. And once something feels manageable, you're much more likely to actually do it. You could spend your first minute sitting quietly and taking slow breaths. During the next minute, read a few meaningful affirmations. Then close your eyes and visualize one important goal. Spend the next minute doing simple movements like squats, stretching, or jumping jacks. After that, read a paragraph or a page from something useful. Finally, write down one thought, one goal, or one thing you're grateful for. In 6 minutes, you've touched your mind, body, goals, learning, and self-reflection. But there's a deeper lesson here. The 6-minute version isn't necessarily about staying at 6 minutes forever. It's about proving to yourself that you can begin. Once the routine becomes familiar, you might naturally want to spend more time on certain practices. Maybe meditation becomes 10 minutes. Maybe exercise becomes 20. Maybe reading becomes 15. The routine can grow with you. And on extremely busy mornings, you can always return to the short version instead of abandoning the entire habit. That flexibility is important because a routine should support your life, not compete with it. The real victory isn't completing the longest possible morning routine. It's becoming someone who consistently makes time for personal growth, even when life gets busy. But this brings up another question. Does waking up earlier automatically make you more successful? Not necessarily. And that distinction is something many people completely misunderstand about the miracle morning. Have you ever heard someone say that successful people wake up at 5 a.m. and thought, maybe that's the secret I'm missing? It's an appealing idea. Wake up before everyone else, get a head start on the day, exercise, read, work on your goals, and suddenly you're more productive than everyone around you. But there's a problem with that idea. Waking up early by itself doesn't make you successful. You can wake up at 4:30 in the morning and still spend the next 2 hours scrolling through your phone. You can wake up at 5 a.m. and be so exhausted that you can barely concentrate. You can even follow a perfect morning routine and still avoid the important work you need to do. The real value of the miracle morning isn't the specific time you wake up. It's the intention behind how you use that time. If you naturally wake up at 7 a.m. and have a productive, meaningful morning, there's nothing magical about forcing yourself to wake up at 5 a.m. just because someone else does. Your body and your schedule are different from everyone else's. For some people, an early morning creates valuable quiet time. For others, their responsibilities or work schedule make that unrealistic. And that's okay. What matters is finding a consistent period when you can focus on yourself without unnecessary distractions. There's also something important that often gets ignored: sleep. If waking up an hour earlier means sleeping an hour less every night, you may be creating a bigger problem while trying to solve a smaller one. A morning routine should not become an excuse to sacrifice the sleep your body needs. Instead, think about it differently. The goal isn't to wake up earlier than everyone else. The goal is to wake up with enough energy and intention to decide how you want to begin your day. Maybe that means waking up at 5:30. Maybe it's 6:30. Maybe it's 8:00 because your schedule requires you to work late. The clock isn't the achievement, consistency is. And there's another reason this matters. When you stop obsessing over the exact wake-up time, you can start focusing on the actual purpose of the routine. You're creating a protected window where you can work on your mindset, your health, your knowledge, and your goals before the demands of the day take over. That's much more valuable than simply being able to tell someone, "I wake up at 5 a.m." Because ultimately the question isn't, "What time did I wake up?" The better question is, "What did I do with the time I had?" And when you start answering that question consistently, the effects of your morning can begin reaching far beyond the morning itself. Have you ever had a morning that went surprisingly well, and then noticed that the rest of your day seemed to feel easier? Maybe you woke up without rushing, got some movement in, finished an important task, and started the day feeling in control. Nothing magical happened. Your problems didn't disappear, but somehow you felt more prepared to deal with them. That's where the real power of a morning routine begins to show. The miracle. Morning isn't supposed to end when you finish your last SAVRS practice. The bigger idea is that the mindset you create in those first moments can influence the choices you make throughout the rest of the day. Think about momentum. If you start your morning by keeping promises to yourself, even small ones, you create evidence that you can follow through. You said you would exercise, and you did. You said you would read, and you did. You said you would spend a few minutes reflecting instead of immediately scrolling, and you did. Those might seem like tiny victories, but they can change the way you see yourself. You begin thinking, "I'm someone who takes action," and that identity can follow you into your work, studies, relationships, and personal goals. Imagine starting your day with a clear idea of your most important priority. When distractions appear later, you may be more likely to recognize what actually deserves your attention. Or imagine beginning the day by visualizing yourself handling a difficult situation calmly. When that situation actually happens, you've already spent some time mentally preparing for it. Even reading and journaling can have effects beyond the morning. An idea you discover in a book might influence a decision you make hours later. Something you write in your journal might help you recognize a problem you've been avoiding. The routine can also create a sense of control. Of course, you can't control everything that happens during your day. Someone can disappoint you, plans can change, traffic can be terrible, work can become stressful, unexpected problems can appear out of nowhere. But you can control how you choose to begin, and that distinction is important. A good morning routine doesn't guarantee a perfect day. It simply gives you a stronger starting position. Over time, those small morning actions can compound. One workout doesn't transform your health. One page doesn't make you an expert. One journal entry doesn't solve your entire life. But repeated actions can create very different results from repeated inaction. That's why the miracle morning is ultimately less about having beautiful mornings and more about building a life through consistent small choices. And if you want those choices to last, the final step is making the routine your own instead of blindly copying someone else's. Have you ever started a routine with excitement, only to realize a few weeks later that you were following someone else's routine instead of building one that actually fits your life? That's the final lesson of the miracle morning. You don't have to copy someone else's morning. You have to create a morning that works for you. Maybe you only have 15 minutes. Maybe you have an hour. Maybe you prefer meditation, while someone else prefers prayer. Maybe you enjoy running, while another person would rather stretch or walk. The point is not to make your morning look perfect. The point is to make it meaningful. Start small. Choose a few practices from the SAVRS and make them easy enough to repeat. You can begin with just a few minutes and gradually increase the time as the routine becomes natural. And don't make the mistake of thinking that one bad morning means you failed. You will oversleep. You will get distracted. You will have stressful days. You might even stop for a while. That's normal. What matters is whether you come back. Your goal isn't to become someone who never misses a morning. Your goal is to become someone who knows how to restart. You can also prepare your environment the night before. Keep your book nearby. Put your journal where you can see it. Prepare your workout clothes. Decide what you want to focus on before you go to sleep. The fewer obstacles between you and the habit, the easier it becomes to follow through. And remember, the miracle morning is not about becoming productive for the sake of being productive. It's about becoming more intentional with your life. When you consistently give yourself time to think, reflect, move, learn, and focus on your goals, you're sending yourself a powerful message. My growth matters too. And perhaps that is the real miracle. Not waking up at a specific hour, not completing a perfect checklist, not suddenly becoming a completely different person overnight. The miracle is what can happen when small choices are repeated long enough to change the way you think, act, and live. So tomorrow morning, before you reach for your phone, give yourself a few quiet minutes. Breathe. Think about who you want to become. Move your body. Learn something. Write something down. And then take one small action that moves you closer to that person. If this video helped you understand the miracle morning in a new way, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Rich Mind Audiobook, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next audiobook breakdown. And remember, you don't need a perfect morning to build a better life.
You just need to start. This is the Miracle Morning, and this is Rich Mind Audiobook. I all see you in the next one.